Yes, sir. It is.
Perfect. And screen is also visible.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I can see only limited number of people have joined in. So shall we go ahead and start the call, or we give a couple of minutes for people to join in more?
I can hold for 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So let's wait for 5 minutes and then we'll start.
Sure, sir.
So good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us for this second part of our webinar, which is on refrigerants. So the first webinar we did on refrigerants was on basics of refrigerants. So that was about understanding history of refrigerants, new refrigerants, and some of detail of how different refrigerants work and all that stuff. Now what we have in this webinar is Montreal Protocol and its impact on HCFCs and HFCs in India. In our first webinar, we have already talked about what are HCFCs and what are HFCs, but what's the impact on India is something what we will talk in this webinar. So the agenda for today is to slightly go into deeper to understand what is ozone depletion. I know most of you are already familiar with the ozone depletion, but still I would urge, just give me a second. Still it is important for us to touch base again on this important topic of Montreal Protocol, to talk about ozone depletion theory and how it works, and why ozone depleting substances are getting phased out. Then probably go into Montreal Protocol, how Montreal Protocol works, and then the two main things what Montreal Protocol is impacting globally. One is HCFC phase out, so which is coming under HPMP, HCFC phase out management plan, and then we will be also talking of Kigali amendment, where HFC phase down is also working out. So we'll be talking of both, and you can see the difference between the words phase out and phase down. So probably we'll cover that as well while we are talking of HPMP and Kigali amendment. So with this, I start on, and if in between my slide goes off or my audio goes off, so Jitendra, you need to pause me, because I may continue to speak. So you can pause me by raising hand, or just by interrupting me by taking my screen off. Fine. So ozone depletion. Now, when we talk of ozone depletion, we need to first understand ozone layer. So I'm just switching. So this, from this chart, you can see from the Earth's surface you have troposphere, then stratosphere, and then ionosphere. And in this stratosphere is something where the ozone layer lies. Now, this ozone layer is actually formed from oxygen molecules present in ozone layer. So ultraviolet radiations, breaks the oxygen molecule and make ozone. This ozone layer acts as a protective layer because it absorbs a lot of these ultraviolet radiations, which if they reach on Earth are going to harm the human beings. So how it goes, like CFCs, gradually they have very high atmospheric life. So one of the reasons why CFCs were found was because they were stable, they were not breaking easily. So since they were stable, they reached the ozone layer, and once they reach the ozone layer, they start to decompose in presence of ozone ultraviolet B radiations. And when those ultraviolet radiations breaks this molecule, then this breaks the ozone into oxygen. Now, if we see on this chart, the process of breaking of ozone starts from the step 1 when the CFC reaches, and then step 2, the ultraviolet B radiation breaks this CFC molecule and frees the chlorine. Once the chlorine is free, then in step 3 it attacks the ozone molecule. Ozone is oxygen 3. molecule, 3 atoms of oxygen. Now once this is there, what it does, it in step 4 you can see it breaks the ozone into oxygen O2 and chlorine monoxide. Now when it makes chlorine monoxide, you will see in the step 5, which is the bottommost step, this chlorine monoxide will again attach with another free oxygen from chlorine monoxide and will free up the free chlorine. Now once this free chlorine is again freed up, as you see written on the step 6, this goes back to step 2. So this becomes a chain reaction. So it's not like certain amount of CFC, if it is present in ozone layer, it is going to damage certain amount of ozone. No, it is a chain reaction. So if chlorine is present, if the CFC is present in the ozone layer, then it continues to damage huge amount of ozone over a period of time. So that's why this is something which is very important and very alarming. Now what happens if the ozone depletes? When we say ozone depletes, means from O3 it becomes O2. There are going to be adverse health effect on us, on crops, on aquatic organism, as well as on the global warming. We can see skin cancer, we can see cataracts, we can see the immunity deficiency because of the ozone layer depletion, because of the ultraviolet B radiation. So this is something which is very important. That's why the Montreal Protocol came in, because this was probably the world's first and the only treaty which is globally treated as the most successful environmental treaty. This was started on 16 September 1987 in Montreal, with 24 nations and European Economic Community signed the Montreal Protocol to start working on ozone depletion. India also became signatory in 1992. But most of the nations that were major producer and consumer of the halogens already signed in these 1987 protocol. This is another pictorial view of how ozone depletion works. As you see, the ozone, the CFC starts to release from step 1. From our use, it goes to the ozone layer. It breaks the ozone molecule to oxygen. On step 4, on the right hand side, you can see there are less number of ozone molecules. So if it is less ozone, that means there are large number of UV radiations reaching the earth, which creates all type of damage to us. So Montreal Protocol, what Montreal Protocol is, it's an agreement and mechanism to reduce and eliminate the production and consumption of ozone depleting substances. So production means you are controlling the source. So there we can't, because all these ozone depleting substances are man-made chemicals. So once they are man-made chemicals, they can be controlled by limiting the production. So production is limited, consumption is limited. That's how the Montreal Protocol works, to eliminate the entire damaging chemicals from the existence. Now parties, whosoever country including India, must freeze, reduce and phase out their production and consumption of these ozone depleting substances in a stepwise schedule. Now developed and developing countries have a different phase out schedule, because developed countries have matured market and all, so they have different protocols, and versus developing countries where the economy was still growing and to have a large burden was a challenge. So there was a different schedule, and which holds true for entire Montreal Protocol. So whatever substance we are going to phase out in Montreal Protocol, there is a differentiated mechanism for phase out. Now even in the differentiated mechanism, when we differentiate between developed or developing, there is also a multilateral fund. Now what this multilateral fund, which started actually in 1991, is to assist developing countries to comply with the control measures set out by the protocol. So if India need to abide, and India need to say shut down plants and something, then there is a fund which is available called multilateral fund, which provides assistance so that all countries, developing nations, can continue to contribute towards Montreal Protocol and achieving this global target. So that's how typically a Montreal Protocol structure works like, which is very different from the climate regime, what we hear from, what's going on in Paris Agreement and all. So Montreal Protocol works in a very different way. Now, ozone depleting substances. Ozone depleting substances are, something which damage the ozone layer, and there are a number of it. Generally, they contain chlorine or bromine because that's what breaks the ozone molecule to oxygen. And they will generally have a very high atmospheric life, because once they have high atmospheric life, then only they reach the ozone layer stratosphere. Otherwise, they would break down easily on the Earth's surface also. Now, what happens? So, these are the typical example like CFCs. We have CFC 11, CFC 12, halons, 1301. So, 1301 is something which was also used as refrigerant for -50-degree temperature application and all. Carbon tetrachloride, the refrigeration air conditioning industry was using carbon tetrachloride as one of the cleaning chemical, and then methylene chloroform, and then HCFCs. HCFC 22 is something which is very, very common and we are still using today. So there is a difference between CFCs and HCFC, and we can still use HCFC, but it is under phase out, and that's what we are going to talk about, HPMP. Then there are also hydrobromofluorocarbons, then bromochloromethanes, and methyl bromide. These have typical chemical application, not much used in refrigeration air conditioning industry. Now, what is ozone depletion potential? If we see the when the ozone layer was or Montreal Protocol was set, the most damaging chemical for ozone layer was CFC 11. So since it was the most damaging, so it was considered as the reference. Now all those chemicals which are damaging ozone layer are compared their damage to ozone as compared to CFC 11. So the amount of damage done to ozone layer of different chemicals are different, and they are compared with CFC 11, and CFC 11 is taken as reference as 1. So if CFC 11 is 1, then the another molecule may be less than that or maybe higher than that. So if a halon, which is like 2 to 3 times or 5 times more damaging to ozone layer than CFC 11, so it will have 2 or 4 kind of ODP, versus say for example 22 will have very low ODP, which is 0.055. So that's how the ozone depletion potential differentiate between different chemicals. Now in India became signatory to Montreal Protocol on 17th September 1992. The first thing what was required to be done for refrigeration air conditioning industry was to phase out the CFCs. Even before the CFC phase out, halons were phased out. Sorry, but we're not talking much about halons here, so it's refrigerant application. So CFC phased out on 1st August 2008 for room air conditioner, or say refrigeration air conditioning market. The major CFC used was CFC 11 and CFC 12. CFC 12 was used for refrigerators and car air conditioning and so many other applications. Now 22 or other HCFCs are still allowed, and there is this mechanism which is a stepwise mechanism to phase them off. So the baseline is 2009 and 2010 is the baseline, and out of that baseline 2013 was the freeze. So whatever was consumed in 2009 and 2010, India was not supposed to cross that in 2013, and we managed well below that. And 2015 was 10% reduction. 2020, which is HPMP stage 2, is going to be 35% reduction, and then 25, 67% reduction, and almost 100% reduction in 2030. So the phase out of 22 or other HCFCs is here to come. You can see from this pictorial view, you can imagine if in 2009 and 10 this graph was growing because of the growth of refrigeration air conditioning market in India, and then all of a sudden it had to come down because from 2014 when we were growing without any restriction, we had to cut down onto the average of 2009 and 10 level. That's what the first decline in the market was seen, and then 10% reduction in 15. Now another target is 35% reduction in 2020. So India is right now working on HPMP stage 2. We are working towards meeting the target of 2020. 2015 targets are already met, and from 2015 till today, we are under the limitation. So whatever is the allowed quantity is something what we are consuming. The next big hit, which is India is going to see, as you see on this graph, is further 32.5% reduction, which is going to be 2025. So in 2025, you can imagine that probably I'm just using this word, there may not be any new use of 22 for new application allowed. It may be only for service that it may be allowed 2025 onwards. In 2020 onwards, yes, there may be certain application because we'll be having still some quantity of 22 and other HCFCs available. 2030 is almost zero, so then it becomes almost complete phase out. There may be still 0.5% of baseline which may be available for some essential use or some applications where it is very hard to phase out. Now when we talk of the all these numbers in the earlier chart, all these graph when we are talking of, the important thing to know is there are different molecules of HCFC. Say on this chart, when you see on the left hand side, the molecules in India is 123, 124, 141B, which is a foam expansion agent or foam blowing agent, then 142B, which is also a foam blowing agent and also a component of blends for refrigeration, air conditioning, and obviously 22. So and all of these have a different ODP, which you see on the second column, which is this column ODP. If you can see my mouse, so if you see this, say 123 is having an ODP of 0.020 versus 141B of 0.11, which is very high, versus 22, which is 0.055. Now, how they make a difference is, say for example, for baseline for India, the actual metric ton, 1,000 of kg. So when we talk of R22, it was 10,000, almost 10,000 and 12,000 ton of 22 being consumed in India. So the average of that was taken as 10,945 metric ton. If 10,945 metric ton was the consumption of 22, it will be multiplied with the ODP, which is 0.055, and it will give the ODP ton, which is say 601.98, versus 141B, which was 7,900 and 7,837. So average of this becomes 7868, and then if we multiply it with the ODP, which is 0.11, very high as compared to, or almost twice as compared to 22, then this ODP ton of baseline becomes 865.54. Now why we are talking about this is because this makes a lot of difference. If you see just by the amount of consumption of the molecule, probably R22 is consumed much large as compared to 30% more as compared to 141B, 20 to 30% more, versus when you see from ODP ton, 141B being higher ozone depleting substance, its weightage for the baseline is much higher. So for India, which is the total amount which India need to come work on, was 1608 ODP ton. Out of this 1608 ODP ton, 865 ODP ton, which is more than half of it, is coming from 141B. So what becomes important for India or Indian Ministry of Environment and all stakeholders is if we can control the higher ODP molecules which have higher percentage, that's something which is going to give a quicker and faster result. Yeah, I'm sorry. So that's how it works. Like say for example, when I go in number of discussion forums, people talk about 123. So when 123 is going to phase out and all. So you can see here, from 123, which is having a ODP of 0.020. The baseline is 176 metric ton, but in ODP ton, it is just 3.53. So probably from Government of India perspective, this is not something which is very important or significant at this point in time for them. Yes, it need to be phased out because it is ozone depleting, so it need to be phased out. But right now, when India is working on reduction of 25%, 35%, so that is the time period when probably they will focus on 141B, which is 865 ODP ton, or some portion of 22, which is 601 ton, or maybe if it's a low-hanging fruit like 142B. 142B is consumed by only limited number of players, and it is a blend component which can be phased out easily. So probably they will focus on these as compared to other baseline component, which is 123. Now, how we flare as compared to some of other geographies. So this chart talks about the baselines of different countries. Say for example, China. China is more than 10 times the baseline what we have. So for China, our ODP ton baseline was 1608. Their ODP ton is 19409. So more than 10 times. Majority of it is 22. If majority of it is 22, that means managing only with 141B what probably India can manage, they can't do that. For them, it is all the way more important to start to work on 22 alternative or phase down from right now, whereas we don't see in market there is any impact on 22 or most of the refrigerant application of HCFC. So this 141B or our baseline contribution to of 141B was something which was giving this buffer for India to work. For other countries, smaller countries like Indonesia, they are 400 ODP ton of baseline, and again 141B component is very small, versus Vietnam, where 141B component is very, very high, and the as compared to 22, and there is no other, almost nothing else is there. Similar to China, Thailand and Malaysia is there. So they have 141B, limited amount of 141B, because most of their CFC phased out of foam went to hydrocarbons. So it's only certain amount of application which is still working on 141B. Rest is already phased out. So that's why their baselines are smaller and the contribution of 141B was smaller. So for India, if we talk of sitting today, which is HPMP, we are working on. So for us in India, 22 is definitely important and something which is the alternatives are there. So in our third part, we are going to talk about the alternatives of 22. We are going to talk about alternatives of 123, because 123 is also there, may not be very high, but it is also there, and probably it is going to replace the application of 123 chillers is something which is going to expand in future. And then 124 and 142B is something which is getting eliminated because they were used as blend components. 141B, again, there are some HFC substitutes, but yes, there are a lot of alternatives, and 225 is not much used in India, so we'll not talk much about it. So yes, for India, 22 is one thing which right now India is working on, and will that is some of the biggest challenge for India is to deal with 22 phase out. Now coming to the another important topic, which is the Kigali Amendment to Montreal Protocol. Now this meeting, which was 28th meeting of parties of Montreal Protocol, which happened in Kigali, Rwanda, On 15th of October, it was accepted to take Kigali Amendment to bring HFCs under the Montreal Protocol. Now there is a different word like HCFCs or CFCs. We were talking of phase out. Here we are talking of phase down. When we were talking of phase out, we were talking of eliminating, means the production and consumption is going to become zero towards the end of the phase out. Whereas in HFC, we are not talking of zero. We're talking of that probably there will be 15% of baseline which will be consumed for essential applications forever. So that is something which is not going to be, HFCs are never going to be phased out. Their limitation on application, their limitation on volume use is something which will come, but it will not be coming down to zero. Now this chart is a summary of non-Article 5. So non-Article 5, if we talk of, non-Article 5 is kind of developed nations you can talk of. Now, within non-Article 5 there are two groups, but both are almost similar. So Russia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Belarus, they have taken a slight delay in the start of the phase out, phase down program, but then 2029 onwards they are going to meet the same baselines as compared to other main group of Article 5 countries. Now here, if you recall what we talked about in HCFC phase out, the baseline for India was 2009 and 2010. Now here, for non-Article 5 countries, for HFCs, the baseline is 3 years, 2011, 12 and 13. So whatever is the HFC consumption and production of these 3 years, so average of that plus the baseline of HCFC, 15% of that baseline will be taken as a complete baseline for HFCs for non-Article 5 countries. In case of these few exceptional countries, the baseline will be considering same 3 years for HFC, but instead of 15% of HCFC baseline, it will be 25% of HCFC baseline which will be taken. So probably their their baseline will be slightly higher as compared to, not in absolute terms because these are smaller, but yes, in terms of percentage, it may be slightly higher. Now, the reduction is going to happen in 2019 onwards. When we say 2019 onwards, means 10% reduction in main group of Article 5 countries. So whatever was consumption of, say, United States of America in 2011, 12 and 13, they need to bring out that and reduce 10% by 2019. So today when we are sitting in 2017, it is unconstrained growth which is happening right now on HFC. Next year also it's going to happen the same way. Next to next year, 2019, is something when they need to cut down to the level of 2012 on an average and 10% below that. So probably the first significant step on HFC globally, what we are going to see is going to start in 2019 onwards. And then after 5 years, it's going to be another major drop, which is a 30% drop. So 10% and then 30%, so makes it 40% of total baseline is something which will come in 2024, and then 29 another 30%, and then another 5 years 10% more, and then 5% more. So then 1336 is something what they're saying is completion of the phase down, because the baseline of 15% of the baseline will continue to be available of HFCs, not HCFC, because HCFC is there in the baseline, but their use will restrict because as per the earlier Montreal Protocol requirements, not for HFC under Kigali Amendment. So only HFCs may be allowed after 2036 in non-Article 5 countries for up to 15%. If we see the same thing on the graph, this is how the graph looks like. So, we're not talking of zero, it's around 15%, which will be going, and that's the 2019 is the phase out start, and 2037 is the almost phase out completion. Now coming to India, which is very significant for us to talk on. So in developing countries for Kigali Amendment, there are two groups. Group 1, which is majority of the developing nations, and Group 2, which is developing nations which have higher ambient temperature conditions. So they have taken a separate delay, I would say, a further delay, because in high ambient condition, the scenarios are much difficult for us in India, Middle East, and some more countries. So here, the baseline for country like India is 2024, 2025, and 2026. Whereas for other developing countries like China and others, it's going to be 2020, 21, and 22. So, and then, as you recall, we talked about the nations. There, the HCFC baseline was only 15% because their HCFC phase out was already started a lot of it was already completed during the baseline years, whereas for us, we will be still going through that HCFC phase out schedule. So for us, it's a 65% of the baseline production and consumption. So that remains same. The method of calculation of baseline remains same. It's only the years or the basket years for Group 1 and Group 2 of Article 5 is something which changed. So I am again talking. So India falls in this Group 2 of Article 5, where the baseline is going to start from 2014, 24, 25, and 26. The first reduction what we are going to see, so say for example, the baseline is counted till 2026. 27 is something which India can use whatever amount India wants for use for HFCs, and in 2028 India will have to come down to the baseline level, which will be average of these 3 years. So the first reduction what India is going to see is by freeze, whereas what developed nations were seeing was straight 10% reduction. So this gives us another buffer for India to operate on, or overall developing countries. So for other countries like China, it's going to be, the freeze is going to be in 2024. So when they will be under freeze, we will be having our baseline. I have a personal comment on this, that probably in 2024 to 2026 time frame, when India will be calculating the baseline, a lot of the technologies which will be developed in developed nations and maybe also available or might be getting matured in other developing nations, if that lands up in India, then our baseline will be lower, because we might the low hanging fruits from the phase down of HFC is something which may not be available in our baseline. If they are not available in our baseline in 2024 to 2026, that means meeting these targets of step 1 to step 4 may be tougher for us in India. But again, it all depends upon how things unfold at that point in time. But yes, this is something which we need to know, and which we need to continue to evaluate, that what will be our baseline and how we will be able to mitigate the baseline reduction. Sorry. So the step 1 for us in India will be 32, whereas for China it's going to be 29, which is 10% reduction. Step 2, 37 versus 25, 20 versus 30% reduction. Step 3 is going to be 2042 for us, which is 30% reduction, and for China it's going to be 50% reduction by 2040. And the conclusion for us in India at 85% reduction will be 2047, versus for China and other developing countries it's going to be 80% by 2045. So that's how it's going to unfold. This is how it looks like if we see from pictorial way. So the blue line is something which is the rest of the developing nations, and the orange line is something where we fall in, which is as mentioned here, Bahrain, India, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi, and UAE are part of this group 2, and that's how it's going to work out. So probably we get more time to phase out, but there may be additional challenges if our baseline becomes smaller. Now, what are we know about how baseline was calculated for HCFCs. We don't know the baseline numbers for HFCs, because that's something which is going to happen in future in 2024 to 2026 time frame. But we can consider the HFs when we were having HCFC, which is still going to be the 60%, 65% of this baseline will add into the baseline of HFCs. So the molecules will remain same, like 123, 124, 141B, 142B, and 22. Whereas the new molecules which will be added in Kigali amendment in HFC phase down would be 134A. Now 134A have a lot of application in refrigerants, and non-refrigerants application as well. So 134A is used in automotive air conditioning a lot, and automotive air conditioning is considered to be a more emissive air conditioning, because here the car is on the move, and once the car is on the move, it's subject to leak. So that's why certain geographies have a very stringent regulation to manage 134A in automotive application. 134A is also used in chillers. It's also used in room air, domestic refrigerators, and some refrigeration applications. But yes, that is something which is very significant. It is also produced in India. So there is one refrigerant gas production which I know of, it is also being produced in India, whereas 32 is right now being considered as an alternative, but it still has a GWP of 675. So probably it will be there in the baseline, and we need to see for how long we can continue to use 32, because that still need to be, this is still considered to be higher GWP, and we may have to cut down on its use animation. 125 is not used as a standalone refrigerant, but it is used as a blend component. So for example, 410A is a blend of 50% of 32 and 50% of 125. And as you see, 125 is having a very high GWP of 3,500. That means the impact of 125 on the baseline is going to be very higher. And that is something which is a concern for me, when we see, all these high GWP blends like 404A or 410A, and when our baselines will be there in 2040, 24 and 26, I feel, these blends may be replaced by some low GWP blends or something where the challenge will be tougher for us, I feel. Say for example, for US, when their baseline is 2011, 12, and 13, most of their new air conditioning was on 410A, and most of their commercial refrigeration was on 404A. So their baseline is very strong, and they can, if they reduce the GWP of the molecule which replaces 410A, they can manage. Versus if those molecules are very efficient and gets adopted in India before 2024 to 26, then our baseline will be smaller, because our same segment of room air conditioner might have already shifted to something which is having a lower GWP as compared to what the other baselines were having. So that's my personal worry for delaying the baseline. But yes, that's something which we need to see how things unfold in future. 143 is also one of the blend component which is used in 404A and all. 152A is a blend component, plus it is also used in certain applications and has very low GWP of 124 as compared to rest of others. There are some additional HFCs which are there, which are not commonly used in as refrigerants, but they will be also covered under this, and so there will be a different basket. So 245FA mainly a foam expansion agent, a foam blowing agent. 236FA a fire extinguishing gas. 365 MFC foam blowing as well as cleaning agent. 227EA for some of you might have heard of FM200, so that's 227EA. So that's also, and then HFE 4310ME. So this is something which is a cleaning agent. So all these, because of their high GWP, may have a contribution in our baseline, and these will have to be controlled under Kigali Amendment, which is going to start acting in India from 2024 to 2026 onwards, and the first decline we are going to see is going to be in 2028. Now, what are the applications which are going to be impacted? The application impacted is, of course, refrigerants, because most of the refrigerants, the other refrigerants which are not coming under Montreal Protocol are natural refrigerants. Ammonia, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons are the refrigerants which are not coming. Most of the other refrigerants are coming under control. So probably whatever refrigerants we are using today, we will have to phase them out or phase them down and move to something else. So this is something which is important. And in our third part of this webinar, we are going to talk about these refrigerants, in which all application, what are the new alternatives which are coming up, and how they are flaring as compared to Indian scenario, from high temperature, voltage fluctuation and all that stuff. So how they may take up shape for India. So that's what we'll be going to talk about in the third concluding webinar. The other applications which are being impacted by Kigali Amendment is foams. So foams also impact us in refrigeration air conditioning, because if the quality of the foam is not good, or the heat barrier of the foam is not good, then the refrigeration or air conditioning load increases. So foams are also getting impacted. The HCFCs and HFCs from foam need to be controlled. Fire, so fire suppressant, so FM200 or this 134A and some more application, 236FA. These are some of the clean agent fire suppressant which will be coming under. These are generally non-emissive. There is no much emission from these applications, so probably the delay may be larger for them to phase down, because small amount of use and then non-emissive application. Now, solvent is something which is very small amount of use but very emissive, because a lot of these cleaning agent, essential oils, I don't know if you know, but a lot of these aroma oils and all what we use, some of them use 134A as a solvent for essential oil extraction. So that is also something which will may get controlled under this Kigali Amendment. Cleaning, yes, a lot of solvents are used for cleaning. We talked about 365 MFC, 4310, and so many others. Propellants. Now this is something interesting. So there are a number of use of HFCs in propellants. Industrial propellants for various application, cosmetics, so deodorants and all also use some of the HFCs. And the medical aerosol. So when we talk of medical aerosol, it's the asthma inhalers. So they also use 227 and 134A as a propellant and solvent. So this is something probably, which will, to me, will easily qualify for, the essential use and may continue to be used forever. So whatever, when we talk of baseline 15-20% is something which can be used forever, is this thing which may be one of the definitely qualifying application. Etching application, this is something which is interesting. The electronics industry is increasing, so a lot of semiconductor industry for etching of the wafers, they use the HFC. So that is something which is very high emissive, because it's almost all is emissive. And then the glass bottles, a lot of these expensive wine bottles are etched inside so that the bottle does not decolor by these HFCs. So that is also something which will be, controlled and, be impacted. And the ORC, which is last on this list, is organic Rankine cycle. Organic Rankine cycle is not much in use today, but probably as we see, when we talk of baseline in 2024 to 2026, this will be the time when we may have a lot of ORCs, organic Rankine cycles, for renewable energy or waste heat recovery already available in India. So that will also is also something where we need to see how we will cope up, because if the technology comes up new, if they comes up on HFC versus HFC free, is something which is important for us to know and monitor. Fine. So with this, this was my last chart. So I open for any question, comment, or feedback. So Jitendra, you have unmuted everyone so that they can raise a question.
And these are additional extra costs. So how we will bear it as nothing.
यहाँ पे ट्रॉली नहीं जाएगा, यहाँ पे ट्रॉली। हाँ, यहाँ पे कुछ हम स्टॉपर लगा देंगे, ट्रॉली विल नॉट गो बियॉन्ड दिस। तो साइड पे कितना रखे सर? यहाँ पे ऐसे वॉल आएगा। सर्विस नो सर्विस फॉर पार्ट्स नो साइड। ठीक है सर, ठीक। तो 2 इंच पीछे 100 mm क्योंकि उनका ड्राइंग और फिनिश्ड प्रोडक्ट में थोड़ा बहुत वेरिएशन आ गया, तो बाद में साइड में दिक्कत नहीं आएगा।
How do bromine atoms affect ozone layer?
Where is Bangalore? Is this? Jayanagar. Looking to that Nagata road. South. Nagata road. You should have called member come. You will have seen the site. Select. Anything else? There's a printout that I'll study that and come back to you. Because I don't have printer in my house.
How do bromine atoms affect ozone layer?
Hello?
How do bromine atoms affect ozone layers, sir?
Sorry.
That's how I that mail that he had sent.
Question, but by mistake I was muted, so I'm unmuted now. So I can answer. So, global warming is not related directly to ozone layer, because global warming is something which is happening on ozone layer depletion, which is happening on stratosphere, and but now it is falling. Kigali Amendment brings the chemicals which were actually used. Majority of these chemicals, HFCs were produced as alternative to ozone-depleting substances. That's why they have been brought into Montreal Protocol, because these environmental regulators can manage HCFCs under Montreal Protocol easily, because they already have the competency. This Montreal already have the competency to manage. If it is not, the global warming, because are not since Montreal Protocol was now, and it part of like SPT and others also have development. Did I answer you? So, any more question, or we conclude?
How do bromine atoms affect ozone layers, sir?
How global warming impacts ozone layer? You're asking how?
Mechanism, how? Sir, mechanism.
Global warming does not impact ozone layer. Global warming does not impact ozone layer. It's very clear.
Bromine atoms, sir.
You heard me?
How do bromine atoms affect ozone layers? How do bromine atoms affect ozone layers, sir? Hello?
Or if you can drop message on chat, because there are a lot of noise. I can't really. So if you are asking something else, then I'm not reading it. So if you can just write on the chat button, then I can read out and. Fine, sir. Any more question? If there is no more question, and my contact details are there, you can reach out to ISHRAE or to me. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening to and coming with the last webinar on this refrigerant webinar series, which will be on alternative refrigerant evaluation from Indian context. So we will come out with a date and we'll inform you. So thank you very much for attending the webinar. Thank you.
देख ध्यान